The car was a cocoon of silent luxury, a fortress against the screaming frenzy outside. Wang Yibo sat in the back, the rhythmic flashing of 1,000 camera bulbs painting fleeting streaks across his face. Beside him, in the dim light of the interior, Zhan'S scrolled through his phone, a quiet smile playing on his lips. They had just finished a joint press event, a choreographed dance of polite smiles and carefully worded answers. To the world, they were colleagues, professional friends, a beloved, but firmly platonic, public pairing. The truth, the real story, was a private language spoken in glances and a shared, profound silence. The car pulled away, the crowd's roar fading into a manageable hum. Yibo leaned his head against the cool glass, his eyes closed. He replayed the moment from the red carpet, a minor, almost imperceptible misstep when a photographer had stumbled, sending a flash of panic through the air. In that fraction of a second, before the security team could react, Yibo had instinctively shifted, his body a quiet shield between the photographer and Zhan'S. He had done it without thinking, a silent, invisible maneuver. No one had noticed. Except for Zhan'S. The brief, almost imperceptible touch of his elbow against Yibo's arm had been his wordless thanks. That was the truth of their relationship, a series of such unspoken moments, a constant low-level vigilance that transcended the bounds of friendship. Later that night, in a private dining room high above the city, the real conversation began. It wasn't with words. It was in the way Zhan'S reached for the water jug and, without a single word, poured Yibo a glass, a silent acknowledgement of the long, dehydrating day. It was in the way Yibo, in return, picked up a single chopstick and, with a quick, deft movement, stole a piece of food off Zhan'S plate, a casual, almost cheeky gesture that was born of a familiarity so deep it felt like a lifetime. The mind-blowing truth wasn't a sudden reveal. It was a slow, agonizingly beautiful discovery, a realization that had begun on the set of their first drama. They had been on a mountainside, filming a scene that required them to cling to a cliff face. The cold wind howled, and the fake snow machine misted them with a chilling spray. Zhan'S, exhausted and shivering, had looked up at the sky, his face pale with fatigue. Yibo, a silent sentinel, had watched him from a few feet away. The director had called for a 10-minute break. Yibo didn't move. He simply waited. When the director's back was turned, he had walked over and, without a word, reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair back behind Zhan'S ear. It was a simple, tender act, a gesture of care so profound it had shaken Zhan'S to his core. In that moment, among the fake snow and the howling wind, he had understood. This was not a colleague. This was a man who saw him. A few months later, the truth solidified in an even more terrifying way. It was during the height of their public fame, a period of relentless schedules and suffocating public scrutiny. They were at an awards show, surrounded by a sea of flashing lights and adoring fans. Yibo had been in the middle of a press line, answering a barrage of questions, when the air had changed. He couldn't place it, but a prickling sense of unease had spread through him, a gut feeling that something was wrong. He had scanned the crowd, his gaze finally landing on Zhan'S, who was also being interviewed a few feet away. In the chaos of the crowd, Yibo had seen it, a fan in the front row, not with a gift or a banner, but with an object clutched tightly in their hand. It was a small, sharp shard of glass. Time seemed to slow. Yibo's mind, a machine of precise calculation, went into overdrive. He knew the protocol. He knew he should signal security. But there was no time. The fan was already raising their arm, a fanatic gleam in their eye. Without a word, without a moment of hesitation, Yibo had turned from his own interview and, in a single fluid movement, walked to Zhan'S' side. He had stood there, his back to the crowd, his posture subtly changed. To the outside world, it looked like a casual, friendly gesture, a shared laugh, a quick word. But in that moment, in that one pivotal decision, he had put his own body between the threat and the man he was silently protecting. Zhan'S, seeing the grim resolution in his eyes, had understood. He had simply leaned in, a quiet question in his gaze. Yibo had shaken his head, a single, barely perceptible motion. The fan, seeing their opportunity gone, had been discreetly escorted away by security. The moment passed without a single word exchanged, a secret kept safe in the quiet space between them. The truth, Mei Ling realized, wasn't about a scandalous relationship or a public reveal. It was about the things no one saw. It was about the private battles fought on red carpets, in dimly lit cars, and in the unspoken language of shared experiences. Their bond was not for public consumption. It was a sanctuary, a quiet place where they could be themselves in a world that demanded they be something else. Their greatest act of love wasn't in a public declaration, but in their fierce, unspoken commitment to protect each other from the very world that celebrated them. That was the real story, a masterpiece of quiet devotion, told in gestures that the world could never read. The air on the red carpet was a chaotic symphony of sound and light. The roar of the fans was a deafening tide, and the flashing camera bulbs were a relentless, artificial lightning storm. Wang Yibo stood on a podium, a picture of cool professionalism. He answered questions with his trademark brevity, his expression calm and his body language a study in effortless control. It was a well-practiced routine he could perform in his sleep. Then, a sudden, subtle shift in the atmosphere made him pause. It was a faint prickling on the back of his neck, a dissonant note in the chaotic symphony. His internal sensors, finely tuned from years of living in the public eye, were screaming a warning. His gaze, seemingly casual, swept the crowd, moving past the waving banners and the eager faces until it landed on Xiao, who was being interviewed just a few feet away. In the sea of adoring faces, one stood out. It was a fan in the front row, their smile too wide, their eyes too fixated. They held a small black clutch purse, and as Yibo watched, he saw a sliver of something glinting in the light. It was a piece of glass, a sharp, jagged shard that the person was slowly, almost imperceptibly, sliding out from the purse. The fanatic gleam in there sent a jolt of ice through Yibo's veins. He knew what was about to happen. He knew the protocol was to subtly signal security. But his body, a machine of honed instinct, had already chosen a different path. Time seemed to slow down to a crawl. In that elongated second, Yibo didn't think about his career, his carefully cultivated image, or the potential for a public scandal. He didn't think about the fact that he was breaking protocol, leaving his own interview to move toward a perceived threat. His mind was a single crystal-clear thought: protect him. It was a command so primal, so absolute, that it eclipsed all logic and professional training. He took a step, then another, a fluid motion that looked to the public like a casual sidle over to his friend. He placed himself directly in the line of fire, his back to the crowd. His posture subtly changed from a relaxed stance to a solid, unyielding shield. The camera flashes continued, blinding and relentless. He leaned in close, his head turned as if to whisper a joke, his voice low and serious. "Be aware." Xiao, his own senses finely tuned to Yibo's moods, understood immediately. He didn't show any fear or panic. He simply nodded, a single, barely perceptible motion. He knew what Yibo had just done. He knew what he was shielding him from. There was no need for words. Their communication was a silent, symbiotic dance. The fan, seeing their opportunity gone, hesitated. Their moment of shock and confusion was all the security team needed. They were discreetly and quickly escorted away, the entire incident a secret swallowed by the chaos of the red carpet. Yibo stood there for a moment longer, his heart thumping against his ribs. He felt Xiao's hand on his shoulder, a light touch that was a silent promise of gratitude and understanding. He finally turned back to his own interview, his face still a mask of calm, but his eyes were different. They held a glint of fierce, protective resolution. The world would never know what had truly happened on that red carpet. The media would report on their friendly interactions, and the fans would celebrate their on-screen chemistry. But in the quiet moments between them, in the safety of a private car or a dressing room, they both knew the truth. Their bond was forged not in the spotlight, but in the shadows, in a single terrifying second where one man, without a word, had chosen to stand between another and the chaos of the world. The cold air of the hotel room was a stark contrast to the blinding heat of the stage. Xiao stood at the window, staring out at the blurred lights of the city below. His mind, however, was still on the awards show, replaying a scene that had unfolded in a flash of noise and light. He saw Wang Yibo's body, a living shield, moving instinctively between him and an unseen threat. The quiet understanding they had shared in that moment was a language only they spoke, a truth known only to them. As he replayed the scene, a profound realization settled over him. For so long, he had seen Yibo as his stoic, unwavering shield. He had viewed their dynamic as one where Yibo, with his quiet strength, protected him from the chaos of the outside world. But standing there, in the solitude of his room, he realized that their bond was not a one-way street. He, too, was Yibo's shield. His mind drifted back to another day, another stage, another silent act of protection. It was during a live talk show. The cameras were rolling, the audience was electric, and the host, a charismatic but relentless interviewer, was pushing for a deeper emotional truth from Yibo. The questions were subtle at first, then they grew more pointed, prodding at Yibo's carefully guarded inner world. The host asked about his vulnerabilities, his fears, the emotional toll of fame. Zhan, seated beside him, could feel the tension radiating from Yibo. His body, usually so relaxed and fluid, was rigid. He was shutting down, retreating into his shell, his answers becoming monosyllabic. To the public, it looked like Yibo was being his usual cool, quiet self. But Zhan saw the truth. He saw the flicker of anxiety in Yibo's eyes, the subtle shift in his posture that signaled his discomfort. This was a vulnerability that the cameras could not capture, a place of emotional exposure Yibo was not comfortable with. And in that moment, Zhan's own protective instincts kicked in. Without a word, he shifted in his seat. He turned to the host, a playful smile on his face, and began to speak. He answered the question himself, but in a way that subtly diverted the focus. He told a self-deprecating story, made a light-hearted joke, and with a single elegant motion, drew the conversation back to the surface, away from the emotional depths that were making Yibo uncomfortable. The public saw a playful, friendly interaction between two co-stars. The host saw a well-timed joke. But Yibo saw the truth. He saw Zhan, a master of emotional expression, use his very vulnerability as a weapon to protect him. He saw a shield made not of physical strength, but of wit, grace, and an unbreakable understanding of who he was. In that moment, Yibo's face, usually so impassive, had softened. A flicker of gratitude, profound and unspoken, had passed between them. It was a silent conversation that said, "I see you. I'm here for you." That was the truth of their relationship. It wasn't about grand gestures or public declarations. It was about a quiet, mutual understanding that they were each other's sanctuary. Yibo's shield was a solid, physical one, a barrier against the chaos of the world. Zhan's was an emotional one, a deflection against a world that demanded a part of Yibo that he wasn't willing to give. They were two halves of a whole, a symbiotic partnership of protection. The next day, as the media buzzed with speculation and the fan communities celebrated their friendly connection, a quiet text arrived on Zhan's phone. It was from Yibo. "I still have your back." And in that moment, Zhan smiled. He didn't need to reply. He just needed to know that their silent promise was as strong as ever.